Good morning. This is Senate Judiciary on Wednesday, February 16th, 2022. This morning, we're pleased to have with us folks from Rights and Democracy, led by Kaya Morris, Movement Politics Director for Rights and Democracy and former representative in Bennington. It's nice to see you again. And we're going to be taking up S-140, an act relating to prohibiting civil arrests at the courthouse a little later on. I thought we'd take a few minutes to hear from Kaya, and then any of her members who wish to testify on S-140 are welcome to jump in. All right.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Good morning, all. Thank you, Chair Sears and members of the Senate Judiciary Committee for welcoming us today. As the chair mentioned before, my name is Kaya Morris, and I am the Movement Politics Director for Rights and Democracy in Vermont. Before I begin, I do wish to share a land acknowledgement with the committee. Rights and Democracy acknowledges the Mohican and Southern Vermont and the Abenaki peoples as the traditional land caretakers of Indakina, which includes parts of Vermont, New Hampshire, New England, and Quebec. And as guests on the unceded territory of the Mohican and the Abenaki peoples, we honor their ancestors, elders, and relations past, present, and emerging. We also acknowledge that our nation has benefited from the uncompensated and exploited labor represented in the legacy of slavery and the present day reality of migrant farm workers. Thank you.
Thank
Rights
you.
and Democracy, which we call RAD for short, and our sibling organization, the Rights and Democracy Institute, were founded in 2015 on the theory of change that it takes people power year after year to kind of make the big, bold, long term changes we want to see in this country. And part of this theory of change is that it takes political infrastructure, and in this case, a membership organization like RAD, to sustain the momentum necessary to do that work throughout and in between elections. So, RAD members and our staff, we work on issues that matter to our communities. We organize for policy change at the state and the national level, and we recruit and train a pipeline of progressive candidates for running for office. So, our members, which you'll meet one today, are folks from all walks of life. They're intergenerational, they're multicultural, activists, artists, organizers, but most importantly, passionate fighters for social justice and meaningful change in our communities and across the state. So, we have chapters in Vermont and New Hampshire. So, you can look for us wherever you are in the New England area. So, this is what we also know is that our current systems are rooted in historical oppressions. They're dysfunctional at times and they can be fragile. And so, when those fragile systems break, Vermonters who've been systemically kept out of places of power are those most impacted. And that is why we seek to bring them here today. So, what we recognize as well is that our mission is really to take action to build healthy communities and make the value of our communities guide the policies of our government, which you all steward here. So, we believe that we can achieve that society where a livable wage can happen and folks can have access to affordable health care and where a progressive and equitable tax system supports an economy that protects the environment and human rights, which I know you are all deeply dedicated to. So it is our pleasure today to testify to your committee and to share our visions of collective liberation and a more just and vibrant Vermont. Something that I just want to give you a little bit of background of, as well as that may come into play as far as what you may hear in different committees today as well. The Rights and Democracy Institute has joined with groups across New England to bring a shared agenda that's seeking to amplify the power and the will of the people. Some of this you may have seen in your committees in different ways, where we formed what's called the Renew New England Alliance to push forward structural change across all 6 states. And today we're thrilled to once again call Vermont's call to action, which is called Vermont's Renews. So Vermont's Renews is a coalition of many different individuals, organizations, activists, and others that are really vested and interested in building out our climate change goals, but also looking at how that impacts other areas of state government and our everyday lived realities. You may have seen this in the Environmental Justice Bill, for example, which specifically calls out public safety, which may seem strange on its face, but there are definite links as we think about how each area of state government is impacted and impacts our climate justice goals. So we've responded to this by bringing forth a BIPOC centered advisory group of experts who are helping to guide our process and this work that we're doing today. So we're working on several different issues, and our bill priorities include, but are not limited to, the Environmental Justice Bill, S-148. In housing justice, we're looking at weatherization at scale and supporting low-income community members, a jobs guarantee, thinking about through all of this and how we're supporting our economy. And it also means addressing the needs of Vermonters, including low-income homeowners, renters, and the homeless. So we're also looking at achieving a just food system. We are looking at a really fantastic project around called Green Justice Zones that's looking at community revitalization that's really people-centered. So they're driving imagining the design of the revitalization of our communities that have been most impacted by our overlapping crises, including COVID. We're also looking at equitable schools, and of course, we're looking at how this fits into our criminal justice system and reforming our law enforcement and our public safety systems. So we're here to have all these conversations, but I want to stop talking because I am so glad to hear from one of our fantastic members, Saudia Lamont, who is a resident of Morrisville, Vermont, and is also the director of REAL. But I will give Saudia an opportunity to speak with you today, to share her stories, and to bring any insights that might be of help for this committee. Thank you so, so much. Saudia, are you with us?
I am. Good morning. Good morning.
Good
Good
morning.
morning. Thank you so much. Thank you, Chair Sears, and thank you, Senators, for listening and taking the time to listen today. I'm going to just speak to a couple of things. And just for the record, I am no longer the director of REAL, but that's okay, but thank you. But I just want to talk to you today about a few of the issues that Kaya had just mentioned and how they pertained to the bills that need to be passed in order to really represent and support Vermonters of color. A lot of the things that and systems and structure that are in place currently do not serve us. As a person of color who was raised by, family members who were law enforcement or wardens even, I believed in a system. I believed in justice. And I believed that if I needed help, I could call and I would be served and I would be protected. The harsh reality that I experienced is that is not the case. The system that I so naively believed in has failed me and my family on many occasions. Specifically, in 2018, when we were being harassed by neighbors and my children were being called racial slurs and epithets and threatened to be hung from trees. Yes, you heard me correctly. My children's lives were threatened to be taken by our neighbor. My car was vandalized, and I did what I believed I was supposed to do and call the police. I was told that there was nothing they could do, that community member had the right to freedom of speech, and that I couldn't prove anything, so there was nothing they could do. They then left. None of the things that I had stated in regards to the racial harm that was caused to myself and my children were included in the report, and it was dismissed and never looked into again. Contrarily, when people falsely accuse my brown son of doing things that he did not do and was not even remotely close to, we are not, and he was not afforded any justice or systems, but we had to then prove our innocence, right? And show how he did not. And the system did not serve us in that same way. What happens when we excuse harms of hate and injustice and racism and discrimination and all of the other things. And almost, if they had acted on it, could have taken my children's lives. When we disregard these things, it leaves the door open for this to come. And people say, well, why don't you leave if you have so many problems? I don't have that many problems here in Vermont. I love Vermont. I've been in Vermont for 27 years. This is my home. And it is my children's home. And if we were to leave, the next family of color that were to come and experience these things, what systems, services, and structures would be in place to serve and protect them? And that is why these things are important. It is important to look at how we address issues of racism and hate. It is important to look at how law enforcement is engaging with citizens and what they do and how they collect their information in regards to confessions, etc. It is important to look at how the presence of law enforcement officers in schools affects our students, not only students of color. There are students who are not of color that feel unsafe in their school systems when there are law enforcement officers present. But that brings a very much a wider question of how do we advocate for safety? Because as we know, during the pandemic, there have been many issues of violence and harm and increased substance misuse and emotional and social emotional dysregulation amongst our youth in our community. So that is why it's important for us to get creative in thinking about wellness and safety and public safety. When we focus on public health and public safety, as opposed to criminalization and harm, you can meet different needs and you can meet the needs of everyone in the community that way. Safety is important, and it is important that Vermonters of color have the same access to the same resources as our white counterparts, that we are treated and protected in the same manners as our white counterparts. Thank you.
I appreciate your comments. And I think some of the bills we're dealing with this year are actually would help improve those situations. So I appreciate both of you being here. You're welcome to stay. And if you want to comment on S-140, you're welcome to. That's actually a bill that has to do with, well, I'll let Eric Fitzpatrick explain it, and the sponsor is Senator Booth. So I'd rather let them explain the bill, but I think it deals with a similar issue, and that is people that get arrested at the courthouse when they're going there to testify or take care of some other violation because they may have documentation issues. So I think it is actually what you were just talking about, you and Kaya. So I thank you very much. We also have just passed out a committee a bill on criminal threatening that, while not perfect, will help address some of the issues, but it's not going to address all of them, unfortunately. But it's a start. So, thank you both for being here this morning. And Senator White has a question or comment.
I have an apology. For some reason, I have had this on my schedule for the 17th, not the 16th. So I put bills in government operations that I thought you might be interested in tomorrow. But I will, if you are able to come to government operations at 1 o'clock this we meet at about 1:30. But if you can come around 1:30, we'll give you like 15 or 20 minutes, 15. Is that okay? I am so sorry.
It's not a worry. Thank you. Thank you, Senator White. I think we're good. It looks like I'm getting messages from our folks that they did receive that message. So it's appreciative. And we understand that everything is moving. It's always moving in the legislature. So it could be long floor times or
Yeah.
sudden urgencies that change it up. So we've been ready and prepared for any kind of adjustments. So we're just
And
really
did
go
you get
ahead.
an invite to government operations for today? I'll make sure you get one.
Fantastic. Thank you. I
Okay.
appreciate that very kindly.
Okay. Thank you.
No worries.
Anything else on this before we move to S-140? Senator Bruce, do you want to kind of kick it off as the lead sponsor of the bill?
Sure.
Actually, the only sponsor. You're all by yourself on this one.
Yeah, proudly. So this was a bill that started with discussions with Migrant Justice, who will testify in a minute. They're a group that has been doing great work in terms of trying to improve conditions for our migrant workers. Just wanted to say, going back to my first term in the Senate, I was on agriculture, and it seemed to me that there were two things as we got into it, two things that were saving Vermont farms, and I would say they were organic farming, which was paying a higher price for the goods that the farmers had, and migrant workers who were all over the state, and they were performing jobs that were very, very difficult to fill, but were dangerous in some cases, and they were isolated on farms. And so that was when we passed driver's privilege cards and to allow them to move around and get health care and groceries. But this is a different problem for these workers in that sometimes, as the chair said, their documentation issues put them at risk of arrest or detention or deportation. And what this bill says is, I hesitate to call it simple because there are complicated interrelations between federal and state law. But what it attempts to do is prevent someone from being arrested when they go to a courthouse in good faith as a party to a proceeding or a witness or someone who is there to support our judicial system, but that opportunity is used instead to arrest them and perhaps jail them or send them out of the state. So what this does is it provides a series of tools to allow them to be free of that fear of arrest. But if someone violates and does arrest or detain them, it gives them options, and it gives the Attorney General of Vermont options for how to deal with that. So with that, I'll turn it over to Eric, who drafted, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Eric, if you want to walk us through this, it's a short bill.
Yeah, I actually had walked the committee through it already last week.
Oh,
so,
that's right. You did. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Happy to refresh your recollection. I don't have anything to add to what Senator Baruth said or what my walkthrough was last week. You may recall we had an interesting discussion last week about how this bill is based on common law privilege against civil arrest that's been around since the 16th century. It's grew out of English common law, was incorporated into the common law of the United States at independence. There's an interesting opinion from the Southern District of New York that I had Peggy helpfully posted on the website if the committee wants to learn any more about that interesting history. But it's based on that, as well as a New York statute that passed already doing something very similar. I reworked the language, obviously, but the concept is exactly the same. And that's as Senator Baruth described, which is that it creates, or in some ways, one might say, puts in statute this common law privilege, this privilege against civil arrest. And it's important to remember that it's civil arrest. It's only an arrest for purposes of someone's appearance at a civil proceeding. It doesn't have anything to do with a criminal proceeding. It's not to do with And none of that would be affected by this bill. The ability of the state or a law enforcement agency to arrest somebody because of a criminal matter is not something that's addressed in this bill. It's only to do with an arrest for purposes of civil proceedings. And one of the main civil proceedings in which that could occur these days, used to be different long ago, but these days is an immigration proceeding. Immigration proceedings are civil in nature. And I think the committee also got some materials I sent around that indicated that these arrests had happened over the last couple of years, sometimes at Vermont courthouses. And I think the idea of the bill is to create a prohibition on that practice, provided that, so if someone or a person's either themselves or their family or household member is attending a court proceeding as a juror, witness, etc., then they cannot be arrested there at the courthouse while they're coming and going, essentially, from that court proceeding. And the enforcement mechanism, so to speak, is that if someone does violate that and arrest them in that situation, they could be held in civil contempt, as well as be the subject of a lawsuit for damages. So a person who was arrested in violation of the statutory prohibition, if it passed, would be able to sue the person who arrested them for monetary damages in the civil division. So that's it essentially in a nutshell, and happy to answer any questions or whatever else the committee might find helpful at this point.
Yeah, thank you. Senator Benning.
Eric, I'm reading 3701A, prohibition. And I understand the intent of the person who is a party, a juror, attorney, or witness. Am I reading this wrong, though, that if their brother or their household member of whatever relation is attending and is not a party, juror, attorney, or witness, is also extended this umbrella, if you will?
I read it as that person would also have to be, I see what you mean, any person or family member of the person. My first reading of it was that the household member or family member would also be a party, juror, or attorney, but you might be right. It might be the language needs to be tightened up there depending on what the intent is.
My assumption is that the intent is to try to protect an individual who is participating in a court proceeding, not simply observing one. And as I read that, I thought, you know, that doesn't quite fit, at least the way I'm reading it.
If I can just jump in, I read it as once it gets to who is attending a court proceeding in good faith as a party, juror, attorney, or witness. So everything that comes before who, it seems to me, is controlled by the fact that they have to be a party, a witness, etc. So I take Joe's point that there might be confusion in reading it, but it seems to me as though I read it the way Eric reads it, which is that the only people who are going to be roped in are people who ultimately are in that category of party, juror, attorney, or witness.
Philip, I'm not the English major here, but when you say or family or household member of the person,
Yep.
you are muddying the water. If your intent is that any person who is a party, juror, attorney, or witness, you should just say that and not have the phrase family or household member of the person, because that's very easily, as a defense attorney, I would use that language to say, hey, you can't bust this person.
Yeah, and
even though
never,
they're not a party in the proceeding.
Yeah,
Well,
never hurts to clarify.
Well, let me ask, since this was taken from a New York law, Eric, is this the way New York has done it?
I'm not sure off the top of my head, Senator Sears. Let me just look that up and I'll.
Why don't we look that up and hear from the witnesses? Because I can think of some good reasons why you may want to include that. Supposing that it's a child, a minor, and the parent brings them, they're not a subject. Obviously, the child wouldn't be a juror, but could be a witness or whatever that we've just heard about and has been harmed by someone, and they're a witness to that, and they were at court, should you be able to arrest the mother who brought them? So that's how I would see it.
It's a policy decision, but I want to make sure I understand what the
No,
policy
understood.
is trying to
I
evict.
appreciate you raising it, but I think I could read it differently too, though, in the way I just explained. If I might. So I actually, we'll look into that, but I think it'd be good to move on to some witnesses. Our first one, I think Will Lambeck, who's been here before, and welcome back. Will, nice to see you. I think you have a couple of witnesses you want to introduce.
Yeah,
and if you have something to say, you're not on the agenda, but I know you're here in your role with migrant justice. So if you want to introduce yourself and any of the other witnesses, feel free to do so.
Yeah, thank you very much, Senator Sears. My name is Will Lambeck with the organization Migrant Justice. And I'm going to be introducing Olga, who is a member and leader in the organization. She'll provide some testimony, and then I'll be interpreting that testimony from Spanish to English, and then I'll follow up with some comments of my own, if it pleases the committee. Olga, ¿estás ahí?
Sí, aquí estoy.
Ok, cuando te sientes lista.
Hola a todos, mi nombre es Olga Cruz. Soy una trabajadora en una granja de vacas y también soy una líder de la organización Justicia Migrante.
Hi, everyone. My name is Olga Cruz. I'm a dairy worker and also a leader in the organization Migrant Justice.
Creo que ya todos sabemos el motivo por el que estamos aquí ahora, y pues lo que me motiva a estar aquí a mí es la lucha todavía por nuestros derechos, que nuestros derechos sean respetados de una u otra manera.
So I think you all know why we're here today, the bill that we're here to discuss. And I was motivated to come here because I see this as part of a fight for my rights to be respected in one way or another.
Primero que nada, pues a nosotros, bueno, a nuestra comunidad migrante nos preocupa pues la situación de un poco de ir a las cortes, por el mismo temor de ser arrestado. Ni siquiera uno piensa quizás a lo que vaya a decir el juez allá adentro, es más el temor que haya de que pues la migra esté afuera esperando.
So I want to say that our immigrant community is afraid of going to courts in this state because of the fear of being arrested. In fact, when you have to go to court, you aren't even thinking about what the judge might say to you or what might happen inside the courthouse. All you're thinking about is if an immigration agent is going to arrest you when you leave.
Lo que estamos pidiendo como comunidad es que se prohíban estos arrestos, porque si eso sigue pasando, hace que la comunidad es más probable que no vaya a las cortes, así sea acusados por algún caso criminal o casos familiares, demandas legales o por alguna detención que haya pasado antes.
And so what we're asking as a community is for these detentions to be prohibited, because the more that this happens, the more probable it is that members of our community won't attend court proceedings, whether that's a criminal case, a family case, civil litigation, or if somebody is in detention.
Esta ley para nosotros es muy necesario y es un poco distinta a las políticas de no polimigra. No se trata de la colaboración de la policía con la migración, que claro es importante también, sino de limitar las acciones de la migración.
And so this law for us is very necessary, and it's also different from previous actions and policies in place like the fair and impartial policing policy. This law isn't about the collaboration between local police with immigration per se, but although that's also a very important issue that needs to be addressed, but this bill focuses on limiting the instances in which federal immigration can arrest people in Vermont.
Estoy aquí también porque también tengo familiares, conocidos o amigos, y para mí es muy importante que tomen en cuenta lo que se está pidiendo, porque de por sí a veces que se quiere cumplir, ir a las cortes por algo que haya pasado en la vida de cada persona aquí, pero es difícil ir o no ir, y en alguna parte estaríamos fallando otra vez, pero pues no nos da esa seguridad que uno va a regresar, y algunos tienen familias, y si uno les detienen en la corte, ¿qué pasa con la familia aquí? ¿Qué pasa con los hijos aquí?
And so I'm here testifying today, not only for myself, but because I have family members and acquaintances and friends who this affects as well. Because many things can happen in life that could bring you to a courthouse, and then you're faced with a difficult decision of, do I go to court and fulfill my responsibility, or do I not go and not comply with that responsibility? And many people will choose not to go out of fear of detention and deportation, because that means being separated from your family, being separated from your children and your community.
Es importante pensar que pues en qué hacer bien el trabajo que ellos están haciendo, pero también importante pensar en nuestra vida, de que no es fácil, pues cuando llega pues una detención, eso conlleva muchas cosas, y es difícil para nosotros, es difícil como tratar de hacer pues lo correcto, por lo mismo de que pues uno nunca sabe lo que vaya a pasar, y pues esperemos que tomen en cuenta lo que se está pidiendo, porque es muy importante para nuestra comunidad.
So this is an important issue. We hope that you think carefully about this, because it affects our lives. It's not easy when somebody is detained by immigration, and it's difficult to want to do what's right by going to a court hearing, but without knowing the consequences of that action. And so I hope you take this into account, because I think this is a very important issue for myself and my community.
Muchas gracias por darnos este tiempo de participar aquí, y porque nuestras voces sigan siendo escuchadas. Mi nombre es Olga, y muchas gracias.
So thank you again for giving us the time to participate here with you today and to hear our voices. Again, my name is Olga, and thank you very much. Muchas gracias, Olga. Excelente. Y ahora pues voy a decir algunas palabras también. Yeah, thank you very much to Olga. I have some testimony to add, but I can take a break if anybody has questions for Olga first.
Has this happened to any of her family or
Olga,
friends?
¿tú conoces, esto ha ocurrido a personas que conoce, a familiares o miembros de tu familia?
Sí, ya conozco a un amigo, de hecho él iba a estar hoy presente, pero por alguna emergencia familiar no estuvo, pero pues ya le tocará hablar a él, dar su testimonio. Sí, conocemos personas. Esto es lo que estado pasando, amigos, conocidos, eso pasa siempre.
So Olga says, I do know people, a friend of mine who this happened to. In fact, he was going to be here this morning to testify, but he had a family emergency, and hopefully he can testify in the future, because this has been happening. It's happened to friends and acquaintances, and it's something frequent.
Well, and maybe Olga wouldn't know, but in 2017, I think you were involved in this. We passed what I think was Act 5, and it was designed to prevent cooperation between ICE and local law enforcement Do you know if that has been followed up on? Have there been violations of that statute? If I remember correctly, Governor Scott, it followed Trump's initial efforts, and Governor Scott, Attorney General Donovan, pushed this strongly as the I think it was the first bill this committee did that year.
Yeah, thank you, Senator Sears, for the question. Olga, había una pregunta que voy a responder yo. So yeah, you're correct. Act 5 or S79, and I believe you were the principal sponsor on it in the Senate. This was a law that was passed in 2017, which did two things principally. One, it attempted to preempt threats that were happening at the time around the creation of a Muslim registry, and prevented Vermont from creating registries or sharing information based on people's religion or ideology, things like that. And then more germane to this question, it also limited the ability for Vermont law enforcement agencies to sign formal collaboration agreements with federal immigration authorities. And the real target of that was an immigration agreement called 287G, which refers to the federal statute, which allows ICE and Border Patrol to basically deputize local law enforcement agencies to perform immigration detentions. And it will require that the governor would have to sign off on those agreements before they could take effect. So that law was passed and put into place, and has been followed to my knowledge. There are no 287G agreements in Vermont, and this is a distinct issue in the realm of sort of how Vermont relates to immigration enforcement. There's also the related question of Vermont's fair and impartial policing policies. Your committee has looked at this issue of FIPs over the years, and there are significant problems and loopholes with the enactment and implementation of those policies in law enforcement agencies around the state. But this is a distinct issue. As Olga said, it's not necessarily about the actions of Vermont law enforcement, but provides protection around courts from federal immigration enforcement.
Thank you. Go ahead. Any comments you want to make about the bill, Will? Kind of.
Yeah, thank you very much. Y Olga, ahora pues voy a dar algún testimonio también. Entonces, ¿te puede quedar o si ya tienes que ir? Está bien también. Muchas gracias.
Sí, voy a estar hasta las 10. Gracias.
Okay, excelente. So yeah, thank you to the committee. Thank you, Senator Baruth, for introducing this bill. Migrant Justice is a Vermont-based human rights organization founded and led by immigrant farm workers like Olga. So I do want to start off by saying that these ICE arrests in Vermont courthouses are a reality in Vermont. This is something that does happen in the state. Migrant Justice staff members have directly witnessed immigrant farm workers detained by ICE at Vermont courthouses. I personally have received multiple calls from people as they're being detained during and after court appearances. And this happens in multiple courthouses around the state. It's not limited to one specific courthouse. And in each of these cases, and as the bill addresses, these are civil detentions being carried out by ICE. They're not criminal cases. They aren't being, there's no execution of a warrant in these cases. They're all civil detentions solely for the purpose of deportation. This is something that affects criminal defendants, also litigants in family and civil cases, and all court users. And one instance in an Addison County courthouse, and this I think goes a bit to Senator Benning's question from before, but there had been a case where an immigrant farm worker was detained on a criminal charge, and he was being brought in front of a judge for a bond hearing. The attorney asked the defendant's brother to be present as a show that the defendant had community ties, that the judge could release him on bond, and he had a family member there who would vouch for him. I accompanied the brother of the defendant to the Addison County courthouse at the request of the attorney. And when I entered into the courtroom, I saw the director of Vermont's ICE office sitting in the courthouse. I advised the brother of the defendant, who promptly left the courthouse due to the presence of ICE, and the court hearing went forward without the family member of the defendant present. So here's a clear instance of a community member in Vermont being denied due process, essentially, in the Vermont court system because of the intimidation of a federal agency acting on civil matters. So this bill, by prohibiting those detentions, would strengthen due process and in turn strengthen the integrity of the Vermont judicial system. And so this is a needed protection for a documented problem in the state. It also has wide support from a variety of stakeholders. They aren't on the agenda to speak today, but you will be hearing in the future from the Attorney General's office, from the Office of the Defender General, both of whom I've been informed do support this bill. I believe the Attorney General's office will be recommending a slight amendment to clarify their enforcement powers in the bill. We support that amendment and believe it just clarifies and strengthens the intent of the bill. And so with the support, we hope for speedy passage. You'll be hearing from more voices in support directly following this testimony. And then if you do reconvene, Olga had mentioned a gentleman who was detained by ICE at his court appearance. He was scheduled to testify today, wasn't able to join us, but I hope that he may be able to if there are future hearings, so you can hear directly from him. So thank you very much, and I'll end my testimony there.
I do plan to hold a future hearing next week, but day and time to be announced. So yeah, we'd be happy to hear from other folks. I appreciate your testimony, Will. Are there any questions for Will? I think it's fairly clear. Peggy will be in touch with a future date, and hopefully we can hear from some of those other folks that you just mentioned. Senator White.
So I fully support this, but I'm just curious, and in the other states where this is done, do we have the ability to control ISIS? I guess, is it enforceable? I'm fully in support, but I just want to make sure that we make sure that it is enforceable.
Yeah, thank you for the question. And there, I'll leave the specifics of the question to the lawyers who are going to be speaking next. But as you heard from Eric, this is based on the Protect Our Courts Act from New York, which was carefully studied and debated, has been in practice or implemented for over a year now. And it's certainly our belief that this is fully enforceable.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm glad to hear that.
Other questions for Will? Will, thank you. We'll see you next week. Our next next witness is Amanda Garcia from the Human Rights Commission. Amanda, welcome.
Oh, thank you so much for having me here. Chair Sears and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Amanda Garces. I am the Director of Policy, Education, and Outreach for the Vermont Human Rights Commission. I want to thank Senator Baruth for bringing this forward. The mission of the Vermont Human Rights Commission is to promote full civil and human rights in Vermont. The commission enforces the laws over which it has jurisdiction through investigation, conciliations, and litigation, as well as providing education and training. It develops and advances policies and legislations related to the protection of the most vulnerable Vermonters. By its enabling statute, the Human Rights Commission enforces anti-discrimination and civil rights laws. These statutes prohibit individuals or entities from taking adverse action or discriminating against individuals in protected categories. In this case, a national origin discrimination case may be brought to us when access to courts is prevented. What this bill does is strengthen people's access to justice. It creates a clear path for relief. We believe the Human Rights Commission should not be the only process for people that would like to have some sort of relief. So again, it just creates a very clear path. Vermont has seen a fair share of injustices towards our immigrant community, from the settlement of a discrimination lawsuit against the Vermont DMV to the stories that Migrant Justice brought here today, and the stories we might never hear. With this law in place, our immigrant community will be able to seek justice without fear or present themselves to take responsibility. Whether a person is a party on a case or a witness, many organizations who work with immigrant communities work hard to educate them about their responsibilities to present themselves in judicial proceedings. But the fear has always been an obstacle, and this fear was exacerbated by the past administration nationwide. These types of arrests work against due process, and this bill affirms the need to access to that due process without obstacles. In Vermont, we must offer our immigrant community access to a court system, access without fear, regardless of people's immigration status. And the HRC fully supports this bill as is. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Very clear. Amanda, just so you're aware, Senator Benning was the chair of the Human Rights Commission back a few years ago. So we get every now and then updates on the Human Rights Commission, and so Senator Benning, don't know if you've met him.
No, I have not. Nice to meet you, Senator.
Good morning, you as well.
Morning. Thanks.
Thank you. Other questions for Amanda? Thanks so much, Amanda. We appreciate the support.
Thank you.
Falco Schilling is here from the ACLU. I'm assuming in support of the bill.
That's correct. Good morning. My name is Falco Schilling. I'm the Advocacy Director for the ACLU of Vermont. And I think this is actually the first time I've had the privilege of coming in front of the committee this session, though I've had the privilege to be in front of you many times before. I'm actually just coming off of leave. My wife and I just had a new baby. So if I am a bit scatterbrained, it might be due to the lack of sleep, but doing my best to come in support of this bill today. And thank you for the opportunity to testify.
Before you start your testimony, congratulations.
Thank you so much. So the ACLU of Vermont supports S140 because it creates a more accessible legal system for all the residents of Vermont. As an organization that works to protect people's civil liberties, we recognize a key component of that is access to the courts. One thing that we have heard already in the testimony today, and that I'm going to highlight in some of my testimony, is the chilling effect that having civil arrests at courthouses can have on access to justice and also cooperation with law enforcement and just the operation of courts in general. The ACLU, in collaboration with prosecutors, law enforcement officers, and legal advocates across the country, in 2017 conducted a nationwide survey to see what the impacts of increased enforcement from the Trump administration had on access to justice and the operations of the courts. So looking at the change between 2016 and 2017, where we saw a 30% increase in overall arrests and enforcement actions, and also courthouse arrests in particular. Anecdotally, over in New York State, from 2016 to 2017, we saw a 1,200% increase in those arrests in courthouses. So as you've heard from folks earlier, this does have a chilling effect on people's ability and willingness to both work with law enforcement and to engage in court proceedings. This report, which I'm happy to share with the committee, I'm sorry I didn't share it ahead of time, is called Freezing Out Justice. So it does look at the period between 2016 and 2017 when we saw this increase in enforcement and what chilling effect that did have on access to justice and willingness of immigrant communities to work with courts. So some of the key findings from that report were that approximately 20% of law enforcement officers surveyed that found from 2016 to 2017, immigrant crime survivors were less likely to help investigators when police arrived at the scene of a crime, to help post-crime scene investigations, or to work with prosecutors compared to the previous year. 82% of prosecutors said that compared to the previous year, domestic violence cases were underrepresented or harder to prosecute. 70% reported the same for sexual assault. 55 found the same for same difficulties for human trafficking cases, and 48% said they had similar underrepresentation for child abuse cases. Advocates for immigrant communities said that the legal service report a 40% decrease in the number of cases filed on behalf of immigrant crime survivors. And this creates an overall decrease in public safety when we have people who are either unwilling to cooperate with authorities, both to report or be witnesses when a crime has occurred, or to try and report crimes to protect themselves or family members. I also appreciate the testimony and the discussion earlier on the clarification about who this bill would encompass. And I think you heard some good arguments for why this is important to both encompass the people who are directly in the proceedings, as well as those family members who might be accompanying them. As discussed earlier, there's both transportation issues and there's many other legitimate reasons why a family member might be necessary to accompany someone into a court proceeding, and that by denying them or by making them have a reasonable fear of detention, they might not participate, and that could help, that might reduce some of the due process guarantees that folks could hope to enjoy. So keeping it pretty short, because I know that you've been going through a lot and you've heard some really good testimony. You'll probably hear more on this, but the ACLU of Vermont supports this bill and appreciate the committee bringing this forward and having this discussion.
Thank you. Any questions for Falco? Falco, thank you very much. Appreciate your testimony. It's pretty clear. Our next witness is, oh God, grabbed the wrong agenda. Susanna Davis. Is she not here yet? I guess not. Peggy, do you know?
She's supposed to be here. I can reach out to her again.
Would you please?
Sure.
We're actually going a little quicker than I expected.
Senator Sears, can I just ask a question of you? Sure. If we're lining up witnesses next time around, this bill is actually going to create liability for ICE members. I'm wondering if we're going to hear any witnesses from that camp.
Excuse me,
It appears you have frozen. There's a pun in there somewhere between ice and being frozen. There you are. I'm just curious, since this bill would exact a penalty on ICE members who attempt to effect an arrest, I'm just wondering if we're going to hear any witnesses from that side of the equation.
We certainly could if they're interested. Can you check on that, Peggy or Eric? I don't even know where to begin. It'd be the federal prosecutor's office, I suppose.
I would think. Thank you.
Yeah, I would think that you would, if you were looking to hear some perspective from that side, I would think your first stop would be the U.S. Attorney's Office.
Yeah, usually they refuse to testify, by the way.
I just heard from Susanna. She said she's still in House Commerce, hoping to join soon.
Well, we have a break scheduled at 10:15. Can we take it early and see if she can get back to us by, if not, we can schedule her next week and we'll take our break at 10:15 till 10:15, and Yeah, why don't we take our break and then pick up at 10:30 with no knock warrants? Unless there's somebody else on the screen who would like to comment further about this bill. All right,
Good, so
Peggy, why don't we
come
ask
back
her
at
if she,
10, come back at
if we can
10:30,
come-
Nick?
no, 10:15.
10:15.
Yeah, if we come back at 10:15, hopefully she'll be able to testify. If not, hopefully some of the folks, well, we know Eric is already here anyway, could walk us through S228. And then we can hear from other witnesses.
Yep, I'll let them know we're starting a few minutes early on Tuesday, although I
Well,
bet.
we don't know
or
yet.
Susanna, yeah,
If Susanna's here, we're gonna hear from her at
Yeah.
10:15.